Hello and welcome. This is Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. Today we're going to go over the .NET MAUI framework. This is kind of a newer framework as opposed to what we've been doing with the WinForms. And it's basically a multi-platform framework. And so we'll go ahead and take a look at the labs that we have for an assignment, and we'll go over some concepts as well. And I'll show you some things here in Visual Studio. So basically, here's the Windows version of this app, and this is just the basic app. If you follow along with the lab, when you do the lab, the very first part after you set up your environment, after that, the very first part is basically this is kind of the default project that comes when you build a new MAUI app. So you'll see that. Here's just a simple little click me, and it's keeping track of the times. We'll look into this a little more as we go here. Just kind of want to show you that. And then also what's going to be kind of different is in this one, where you used to always bring in the WinForms app looked a little different than that screen we just seen. And also that was the only option, right? Well, it's a little different here. Whereas here we've got these this one's got the emulator, the Android emulator. So here we're doing this one, and then we're going to go ahead and start this. And it's a little slow, and actually there are some things you can do to speed it up a little bit. It's probably a little faster maybe because I've ran it a couple times. Usually that very first time it's a lot slower, but you can see down here the output. It's taking a little bit to start that. So here's the app. And as you can see, it looks a little different, right? So this is a different platform, right? This is the Android platform. So we just looked at the little Windows app, and now here's the Android one. So the whole idea is that you can have one code base for different platforms, right? So here, real quick, we're just going to rotate left. You can see how we can do these different things in here, different testing and stuff. Actually can power it off. I don't know why it's not doing that there, but that's okay. You have all your little different controls here, right? Don't need to worry about that right now. You can even power it off, power it back on. So, we'll look at this a little bit more here in a little bit. Just kind of want to show you kind of the basic gist of how you've got your different platforms that you can code for, right? So let's close that out. So just to go through the MAUI platform here, .NET MAUI is a cross-platform framework that empowers developers to create native mobile and desktop apps using a single shared code base, written in C# and XAML. And what this is XAML here, XAML, stands for Extensible Application Markup Language. Okay, we'll talk about that here a little bit, a little more in depth. So this is a unified approach that streamlines the development process, enabling you to build apps for Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows from a single project. Okay. Now, when we use the word native, what native refers to software or code that is specifically designed to run on a particular operating system or hardware architecture. So that means, when you typically, especially, some years ago, there's some platforms that are kind of multi-platform type frameworks nowadays. But there's still a lot of development And even though there are those, there's still a lot of development that's targeting um, those different platforms, right? Those different operating systems, and so there's a lot of companies out there that are still building just when they build an app, they have a team of Android developers, they have a team of iOS developers, Windows developers. They have these different teams that are actually building their apps you know just for that specific operating system. Um, but as time has evolved here, we've kind of looked into other kinds of frameworks, and this .NET MAUI is a framework where you can actually build, and you can build for multiple platforms, right? And the whole idea of native is when you kind of build something native, you're it's basically you're actually building that using that application programming interface that's provided by the vendor. So by Android, by iOS, and by using that, it's a lot. You can take advantage of all the features. The performance is a lot better and stuff like that. So sometimes some of these earlier platforms that were used to work across multiple devices, multiple operating systems, they kind of sat on top of all these operating systems, but they didn't really allow you to use those really native type things, and so in that case, sometimes you're missing out on certain features, or it's a lot slower. So whenever you see native, that you're probably getting something that's going to be able to perform a lot better and be able to take advantage of all the different options that are available from those vendors, right? What that hardware can actually do, right? So key features and benefits, like we just said, cross-platform development, write code once. You can deploy to multiple platforms, reducing development time and effort. The native performance, you can leverage the platform-specific capabilities and APIs for optimal performance and user experience. Shared code base, you can maintain a single code base for the UI, business logic, and data access layers across all platforms. There's a modern UI toolkit. Utilize a rich set of UI controls and features to create visually appealing and responsive apps. You have the single project experience, so you can work with one single project, like in Visual Studio, single project to manage all aspects of your app development, including platform-specific configurations. So even though we talk about where we can build code for all the different ones, there's always some little specific stuff you have to do for the different platforms, right? But at least you're not having to develop one specific executable just for that platform, only, right? So it makes it a lot easier. Hot reload. We'll take a look at this real quick as well. You quickly see your changes to your app as you code, so you can make some changes. You can see it. Generally with the WinForms apps, we were always used to, stopping it, making some changes, starting it back up again, right? So that's not hot reload, right? You have to rebuild it and start it back up again. But there is this, opportunity here for the hot reload, so you can see your changes as you go along. Okay, and just a large ecosystem and community of developers. So basically, this is a little bit redundant here. Single project for Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows. Shared code base. Platform-specific implementations. The UI is basically you define the UI using XAML. Okay, and that's what that is a markup language. Now, some other markup languages, actually, I'm sure you've heard of HTML. I know that's actually the next course in this program, the HTML JavaScript course. But the HTML is also a markup language where you kind of define the structure of your web page, right? That's another markup language. Now, XAML actually comes from the XML. It's kind of a child markup language, if you will, that's kind of specific for defining an application, right? It's extensible application markup language. And what it does is that you define, it's basically kind of more like configuration files where you define your different, elements that you're going to use in your form, right? In your application, and it will go ahead and just build those for you in there, right? It's a little different. We're going to take a little look at that here in a minute. And then build and deploy. You can use the .NET MAUI tooling to build and deploy your application to desired platforms, generating native packages for each platform. Okay. So here's kind of the architecture of a .NET MAUI application. So here is your platform APIs, which the API stands for Application Programming Interface. Okay. And then that's the way you basically interact with the hardware. That's how you interact with the hardware for using these operating systems, right? Using the API. And then on top of these platform APIs, right? You have for the Android, iOS, and Mac OS, you have this mono runtime. Always have to have a runtime environment. So this mono runtime sits on top of these three. And then you also, for the Windows, your Windows platform, it uses actually Win runtime right here. All right. I don't want to get into too much of this stuff. This is about libraries here. It's a group of libraries. And then on top of that, you've got your platform APIs wrapped in .NET. So basically, it's using these APIs and it's wrapping these for .NET purposes. So then you just use .NET that actually calls and uses these underlying operating systems, okay? So you've got .NET for Android, iOS, Mac, and then you got your Windows UI. And then on top of that, you basically have your .NET MAUI API. There's a single set of UI controls, okay? Automatically translated to each platform without you having to reference the platform API directly, right? Like I was just saying a little bit earlier here, what you used to have to do, especially early days, and not that long ago, and companies are still doing that because they've already started down that path. You have to build. You learn this platform, and you're building for this platform. So sometimes you'll have an app, games and all kinds of different apps that you basically create it. Usually they create them on one platform, and then they create it for the different platform, and so you create one for each platform, right? So it's a lot nicer to be able to have one platform to be able to create applications for all of them, right? All right, how much do I want to go through all of this? I think that this here is a good thing to go through, even though some of the stuff you probably won't know too much about. That's okay. And I'm new to this as well, so as far as the platform is concerned, but this is kind of a decision tree. Okay, this is a decision tree. So this is what companies do a lot of times. They'll say, okay, we're going to create a new app, and then you decide, okay, well, what are we trying to do here? What are we? Who's our audience? How we want to deliver this app? What, right? So you come in here and you decide first of all, do you want this to be a web app, accessible over the web, or do you want this to be one that's deployed on the device specifically, right? So there's advantages and disadvantages to each. Obviously, if you don't have a internet connection or something, then a web app without an internet connection is not going to do much, right? Um, but there are some ways and techniques to kind of do some little bit of things, right? Even though you don't have an internet connection, but you're very limited, right? So, but you have to decide: are you wanting to do a web app, or you want to do kind of a executable that you're going to actually deploy to each device, right? So, if you were going to say, "Hey, I want to do a web app," and this is from the perspective of a Microsoft.net, from a Microsoft.net perspective, right? This isn't any other languages and frameworks. It's different, right? But from a .NET perspective, this is kind of a decision tree where you say, hey, yeah, I want to build a web app. I want to have it accessible over the web. And so here, the first thing here is do you want an SPA or a server rendered? And basically, a SPA is what's called a single page application, and that's where you basically have, usually with a single page application, when you bring that thing up, it's basically a web app, but when you bring that thing up, it's going to bring a lot of stuff down. It's going to make a lot of calls to bring a lot of stuff into the browser, right? So that you can do a lot of functionality just within the browser without always having to make calls back to a web server to do different things, right? So you can do a lot of things within a browser, and you just using in one app. You're not clicking to go a different app to a different page, right? It's all contained in one app, and that's called a single page app. And there's this Blazor, which is a .NET, another technology, and this is kind of built for single page applications. Okay, the other way is to do what's called server rendered, and that's basically where you're making a call, you bring a web page back. It might, there might be some degree of functionality, but it's not the functionality not the extreme that a single page app would have. Has a lot less. So it's just a basic, like most of the apps you see nowadays are have multiple pages. You click on it, a different page comes up. So that's what's called server rendered, and for that you would use ASP.NET. Okay, so that's that path there. Now, if you decide, hey, I don't want to do a web app. I want to do an executable. I want to deploy these apps on these different platforms. I want to take advantage of the performance. Obviously, with phones and stuff, you can bring a browser up in your phone, but the apps that are deployed can do a lot more things. Can use the different features and functions that are available with an app. Location, multiple different things. When you've I'm sure used maybe used a fitness app or something, and when you're using like a fitness app, it knows that you're walking, right? So that's all technology that's available using that phone, right? So you can tap into things like that when you're actually using that platform specific, when you're using an executable deployed on that specific phone, right? Or not necessarily phone, but device, I should just say. But so for an executable, then your next decision is: do I want to do multiple apps or cross-platform, right? And so here you would be basically building a separate app just for iOS, a separate app for Android, a separate for Windows, and a separate app for Mac OS. Okay. And then your other option would be cross-platform, where we want to build for multiple different apps all at one time, and then you basically you would be using the .NET MAUI, right? So another thing I wanted to bring up here is, so there's this concept, there's different called like design patterns. And the reason to use different design patterns is to make sure you separate your code um, by different areas by so that it makes it easier for maintainability. You know, sometimes you're going to have an application. You know, it might be. You know, we just build small little applications here, but some companies have some very complex applications where they have people that are user interface specialists. So you know, and then you have others that know that all that business logic, and they have that skill and that knowledge of the business logic, right? So when you separate out an application, you can have somebody just working on this business logic, right? And they would just work on this model layer, right? As opposed to your presentation and your UI logic. Your presentation UI logic, would be more front end, and you have maybe have a specialist working on that. Sometimes it depends on the company and the application. Sometimes you have and even teams within companies. Some teams might have a big, huge application where they have different people doing different things, whereas some other application may be smaller and they just work across the different layers, right? But there's a lot of benefit in this, to be able to separate this out. And one is like maintainability. And also if, you decide, even though you might start with one framework, even the Maui framework, you maybe move to a different framework. It'd be nice if you have all your business logic contained here that doesn't have any of your presentation or your UI logic at all, right? It's a beneficial because you can move it, right? It's reusable. It can be reused, and you can reuse your same model, and you just change your UI and your presentation, right? Um, Now, one thing I just kind of want to go over here real quick. You got this UI logic and presentation logic. So, what's kind of different between this? UI logic is more like um, more more like interaction. You click a button, this happens. You click a button, you choose something to drop down. A lot of that is considered UI logic, and really UI logic is more of like a subset of presentation logic. But presentation logic might be what fonts you're using. There's different uh, different layers there that can be separated, and presentation logic can be kind of define more of the how something's going to be presented, what's it's going to look like, and that. Whereas the UI logic's more about interaction. Okay, UI logic's more about interaction. You know, presentation's more how it's going to look, how we're going to present it. Okay, and whereas UI's clicking buttons, selecting things, and the all the different interactions and dynamic things that happen there. Okay. Um, yeah, and this is called the model view model pattern. And actually, part of the second lab, you'll uh, update the note taking app, and you'll add functionality to see how that works a little bit. Okay. Let's see what else did I really want to cover here on this. Um, I think just the important thing is to remember the basic. That .NET MAUI is a cross-platform. Write once, run anywhere, right? UI application platform. You can build just one .NET MAUI app, and it will run on multiple platforms. Okay. You can write native apps with .NET MAUI. Um, and the .NET MAUI apps are native apps, right? And just to kind of maybe go into that just a little bit again. Like I said, there's been earlier platforms that sit on top of some of these APIs, sit on top of these different iOS APIs. Your Android, your iOS, etc. And they didn't always kind of hook into all those native type things. They made it very easy, but you miss out on a lot of the performance. You miss out on performance and some of those really specific type features that are available in the native API. Right? You can build apps in .NET MAUI with functional performance and security advantage over web apps. Okay. And that's another thing in your consideration. We were looking at decision tree. When you're deploying something to a specific thing, especially maybe it's a company where you're using some app for this company. It's not a public app. It's a app that you're doing something that's specific to that company, and they don't. Once you put something on the web, it's vulnerable to hacks. There's obviously different ways it can be hacked. Somebody can hack into a phone too, but there's web apps are known. It's if something's available over the web, over the internet, then there's a bigger surface, so to speak, on being able to hack into that. Whereas when you deploy something to just individual devices, if you just had 100 people in your company that had some specific web app that you want it to keep separate, right? And for security reasons, then it's a lot more secure doing that, right? This includes favorite. Okay. Okay. Yeah, there's other besides just C sharp. There's also what's called F sharp, and not used a lot, but and then there's the Blazor, and so that's that. Um, so here I did want to go over. Let's look at the. So here's a lab. So basically, here's the environment setup. So for this lab one, just in your GitHub repository, create a directory called Maui, and then you just want to do this environment setup. And basically, this is it's kind of pretty much all this is adding the package because you already have Visual Studio. Okay, you already have Visual Studio, and then so basically all you're doing is adding the .NET Platform API. So let's bring up that real quick here. So if I go in here and do Visual Studio Installer, modify, and then here I already have mine obviously installed, but you can just select this .NET Multi-Platform App UI Development, right? And this is basically Maui, and then you can go ahead and install, which you've already done this a little bit, right? And then also, so once you install this under individual components, you will see you'll see the .NET MAUI SDK for Windows and also the Android SDK setup, right? I'm not sure if this will be there originally. It might get added when you create that first app, but don't worry about that too much. So basically, that's all. That's pretty much all you really need to do to get your environment set up is to add that because you already have Visual Studio. And then there is the link here to create this first Maui app. Okay, you can choose that, and then or it's basically this here as well. So the important thing here on this, make sure you choose Android. You have these different options. Now, but to run some of this stuff for iOS is a little different. So one thing is different is Android is considered open source, right? So anybody can take the Android operating system and deploy that, create their own device, create their own watch or any kind of device, and basically and put that whole operating system on there, right? On any kind of anything. Whereas these other ones are not the same. Basically, iOS is not an open source um, operating system, and and Mac is not an open source operating system, and so is Windows as well. So it's a little different when and so to do things here within, to do things here also within, it's kind of separate. I'm probably confusing things, but for this, it's a lot easier just to use as Android because it has emulator and everything else. And I'll show you here for the iOS, you have to have a device all set up to be able to do that. Whereas here, Android has these emulators; it will emulate it. So make sure you choose Android here for your platform, and then you just follow through here, and this will just create that same app that I looked at the beginning here, and it's basically just the shell default app that's available, and just follow this all the way through. This shouldn't take long, should not be too much of a problem. Let me know if you have any problems with it. And so, yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I think this step here is where you get this Android SDK manager within Visual Studio. So it might not be there at the beginning. So just follow along here. This should not be a problem for you at all. And you should have this app created there when you do. So let's go look at that a little more here. So I did want to show you. So here's the XAML file, right? The extensible application markup language file. And as you can see here, this is, you can see things that are kind of similar to what we've seen before. Obviously not done here in this way, but we've used labels, right? In our WinForms apps, we've used buttons in our WinForms app, right? So for here, you don't have the designer like you do for WinForms, where you just drag things over, right? So it's done a little differently. And you won't have to do this for the beginning labs here, right? For the beginning couple labs. But you will eventually. We'll do a little bit. So here, you can just actually, the way you can do that, you do this is to add a new image, you double click and has your image. Then you have to add everything else, right? So it just adds that, those tags, right? Those XAML tags for you to do things. So there's date picker. You have to provide everything, but some will, I think, provide a little more than others. So this is your, let's get rid of everything that changed there. So these are your XAML files. And then over here, you can see in your solutions thing, you have your different platforms, right? Now, you're not going to have to worry about this, okay? But I just wanted to show you, this is kind of how this works. So here's your resources. You have to have some specific things for each operating system. And, so the big thing with an Android app is having this Android manifest, right? But and then here, iOS is a little different. So they're different, right? And basically, Mac Catalyst has to do with, it is the Mac's operating system, but you can build basically iPad apps that work within Mac, okay? So it's just kind of a different feature there. Ties, I don't know if you ever heard of that. That's a Linux type. This is an open source. Think like Samsung and Intel. They created this. I'm not sure. I know it's not real popular, obviously. You probably would have heard it a lot more, but that's it's an operating system as well. And then you've got the Windows here. Okay, so use your different platforms. Did want to show you. So you've got these different files, these config files. So here you're creating your styles. Let's look at that. So here's all your colors that you can use, that you define, right? You define all these. You can use some of these things out of the box, especially if they're, if you want to just use, because like this was built when I created this app, that's just using the following along with that first tutorial. So you'll have that from the beginning here, right? And so, you can basically use this as somewhere to get started with, right? Obviously, if you want to do something, some different colors, some different color schemes, that you'll have to change this, right? But these are some ones that are already available just by default. Okay, and you refer to those, right? You're going to refer to those by that. You refer to these by using these keys, right? Then here's some styles. It's telling you, for your button, here's your color, here's your background color. This is how you're defining your styles of your button, right? So this isn't actually creating the button. This is just defining what it's going to look like, right? And let's see, images, yeah. And let's get back to this. So here I did want to show you something. Okay, so here's this hello world. So what we're going to do here, I want to start this up. We'll go ahead and do the Android one. Obviously, click the thing. You've got your Windows machine. So obviously, if you try to do some of these real quick here, for iOS, you have to do either a local device or a remote device, right? This all has to be set up. Um, I haven't done that, so I can't really speak to that too much. The ones that kind of work pretty much out of the box very easily is using the Android emulator or the Windows machine, right? So, and then here for Android emulator, let's say you created an app, you want to test, you don't want to just test on a Pixel 7, maybe you want to test on maybe a Pixel 5, and then another Pixel comes along, and you want to, so you can use these different emulators. You can test on multiple different emulators, right, for the different devices. But like I said, the iOS stuff's a little more. It's a little more complex getting things set up to do the iOS stuff, right? iOS is basically Apple, right? It's basically iPhone, right? iPhone. Um, so that's that. So okay, let's start this back up. So I did want to show you this feature here. Is that the one? Actually, I think I think it's easier. I think I want to do the Windows one here. I didn't want that to happen like that. Okay, let's do Windows machine. So let's fire that up. So we come in here. So this is a nice feature, what you can do here. So here's show in XAML live preview. So we click this. So this is a live preview of your app. And if you hover over this, I'm sure it's very hard for you to see this. I don't think I can change make this bigger in here without doing some config stuff. But here, you can actually even hover over this and you can see the different here's the size, the font, the background color, all of that. It's telling you. And this is based on, basically, it's your XAML file here, right? So here you actually have hello world. Here's your hello world, exclamation point. So if I go down here, let's go up here to hello world. I'm going to go ahead and let me just add a bunch of numbers here. As you can see on the right-hand side, it updated that, right? So this is kind of a live update so you can sit there and do a live preview. You can make changes, add new labels, and as you're adding this here, you can, see this live update, right? Which is kind of a hot deploy, right? So that's a really nice feature there. Every time I change that, you can see it's changing over there on the right hand side. So that's a nice feature there. Now, for things we're going to be doing, you're not going to have to worry about too much of this. Just kind of wanted to give you a little brief overview, and that's really about it. This is just kind of a little introduction. So, WinForms is been around for a while. Now, I don't want to say it's outdated. Yeah, probably it is. But as far as companies using it, there's a lot of companies that still use it. And actually, there was a couple of recent graduates that end up getting jobs on WinForms, right? Doing WinForms. So it's not like it's and like I think I've said before, is once a company kind of has a whole bunch of different apps built with certain technologies, they don't just turn around every time something new comes along, rebuild everything, right? As long as things are working, they stick with it, usually as long as they can, from just from a cost perspective, until the cost doesn't make sense, right? Either from a cost perspective or from a cost, performance, or security, or just some certain kinds of functionality that they want to do that's not available like a Windows Forms app. Okay, so that's about all I have on this. So let's go over here. Let's see. So here was our. So here's this Maui app. So once you do your environment setup, is basically just installing that package. Then you just go ahead and do this Maui app 1 is the one that we were just looking at. Okay, and that's the first one. And it's just a kind of a follow along, very very simple. You're not going to really have to do too much editing. It's more configuration than anything. Did want to mention here. Let me see. So make sure that make sure your location. I don't know how you guys generally do this. I hope just obviously to make it much more easier for GitHub. Make sure your location is, you create your Maui directory locally, and then make sure that your location is that Maui directory in your local to make it easier to push. Which I'm sure you guys have been through this a lot of times with all the other apps you've created, but just wanted to mention that. And then here's a .NET MAUI note-taking app. So you're going to create an application called Notes, and you're going to follow the below tutorial. And after that, we have Lab 2. It's basically go ahead. So you've already got your Notes app completed, and from the Lab 1, and go ahead and follow this tutorial and update that Notes app, following the tutorial, and commit it to GitHub. These should not be too difficult. You might run into some config issues. I'm not sure. From what things I've done, I haven't really ran into too many issues. So, really any issues, I should say. So, so anybody have any questions about anything?